That day, in that very instant, everything changed for Okabe Kazuaki. In front of him, a girl was laughing at him while his mind went blank from the surprise. As a result, the scene grew blurry, almost solemn, as if an imposing presence had risen before his eyes. It was then that, without speaking a word, he made a silent, firm, necessary vow. He would never again misinterpret anyone's intention. From that moment on, Okabe reminded himself of who he was. A second-year high school student, someone who, both during class and outside of school, lived with his mind buried in studying, spending his days as if swimming endlessly in a sea of notes and exercises. All that effort had one single, clear, constant purpose: not to fail the university entrance exams. For that reason, he told himself he had to overcome any distraction or anxiety, no matter what it was. However, a part of him knew that things weren't as simple as he tried to convince himself they were. In his classroom, his classmate Sano Kiara stood out for her cool beauty and a calmness difficult to decipher. From his seat, Okabe noticed that their eyes often met, and every time it happened, his heart reacted before his reason. In fact, he saw her walk past him with natural elegance, and instantly he jolted. He felt heat rush to his face and wondered if he might like her. Yet the moment that idea appeared, he also understood that he was on the verge of interpreting something where perhaps there was nothing at all. So he forced himself to take a deep breath and scolded himself for his own impulse, convinced his imagination was playing tricks on him and that this tendency to feel like the center of everything was dangerous. While he continued studying with concentration, a girl spoke to him in a casual tone. First, she commented that starting to study so early, just as the semester had begun, was admirable. Then, almost immediately, she followed with an observation that sounded like light-hearted teasing, saying he was the same as always, as if he had no friends. Okabe answered without hesitation that it didn't matter, because he had already decided that during high school he would focus exclusively on his studies. Then, without wavering, that girl asked him whether she would be able to have him all to herself that year as well. It was Nishina Hina, a classmate with a cheerful personality, surrounded by friends, completely opposite to him, who smiled with bright eyes and spoke with a familiarity that felt natural. When Hina looked at him, she noticed his flushed face and expressed concern. Even so, Okabe insisted he was fine and forced himself to stay calm, telling himself it was normal for a popular girl to act that way with anyone. Despite that explanation, he contradicted himself inwardly, because his chest was far too agitated to call it normal. On top of that, with a playful gesture and a light smile, Hina pointed out that they had spent 2 consecutive years in the same class, sitting next to each other. She said it as if it were destiny, and her way of expressing it left him uneasy, since once again he felt her words could push him toward an inevitable misunderstanding. Okabe tried to ask her not to say things like that. However, Hina was surprised, and he, with his throat tight and his face even redder, ended up blurting out a comment about how pretty she was. The moment he said it, he regretted it. Immediately, he felt his thoughts spin out of control, fearing he had made another mistake and said something inappropriate. Even so, Hina didn't pull away. On the contrary, she leaned in with curiosity and wanted to know exactly what he thought was pretty about her, demanding clarity. Under that pressure, Okabe sought refuge in his usual answer and said that, right then, he just wanted to concentrate on studying. It was then that he noticed someone approaching, and with that, the atmosphere shifted. A heavy silence settled in the air. Kiara appeared in front of him with a calm seriousness. She came close enough that he couldn't ignore her and looked at him intently with an intensity that left him confused. Okabe tried to understand what was happening, but his mind could only find nerves. Then Kiara spoke his full name, as if confirming something important, and before he could react, she placed a note on his desk. After that, she told him to accept it, explaining that it was her contact information. Okabe was left speechless. Meanwhile, Hina, intrigued, tried to find out whether he knew Sano Kiara. When she heard that he didn't, she commented that Kiara was mysterious, beautiful, and that she was almost never seen talking with friends, as if that distance made her even harder to understand. In the end, Hina felt that Kiara probably wanted to get along with Okabe, and she said so with a slightly uneasy smile. At the same time, she observed his inevitable blush with an increasingly complex expression, as if confirming a silent suspicion. After classes, Okabe walked home with his head full of thoughts he was trying to push away. On one hand, a part of him insisted that maybe Kiara felt something for him. However, almost immediately, he forced himself to deny that possibility, repeating that he shouldn't get his hopes up and that perhaps she had a different goal. At that moment, a female voice called out to him cheerfully from behind and greeted him using a familiar nickname. Okabe recognized the girl instantly, spoke her name, Rui, and she smiled at him warmly, happy to walk home with him again after so long. Kayuin Rui was his childhood friend and also a year younger, someone whose presence felt close, almost calming, even though her popularity surrounded her with constant attention. Then, Okabe noticed the letters she carried in her bag and understood immediately what they were. Surprised that there were so many on the very first day of school, Rui admitted naturally that yes, girls liked those things, as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world. Just then, a strong gust of wind scattered the letters across the ground. Rui let out a frustrated exclamation and knelt down to gather them. Meanwhile, Okabe assisted her with his gaze, and upon noticing her uniform, he realized it was new, though she asked him not to worry about that. As she carefully picked up each paper, Rui thought aloud that those letters had been written by people who had taken the time to think about her, and therefore she couldn't ignore them or treat them with indifference. Okabe watched her with sincere admiration, feeling she was still amazing. Then, seeing her flustered, he offered her a handkerchief, and Rui accepted with gratitude. Immediately after, Okabe repeated that she was still as incredible as always. Rui, blushing, let out a playful remark, hinting that perhaps he had fallen in love with her again. Then she looked at him calmly and told him that he, too, was the same as always, with that same kindness she remembered. At that, Okabe, uncomfortable, looked away and responded with awkward gratitude, while Rui let out a low, gentle laugh. In the distance, some girls recognized her excitedly. For that reason, Rui happily said goodbye, saying it had been great to talk after so long and promising that they would see each other again. Okabe replied simply, and when she walked away, he suddenly felt a presence behind him, which made him flinch. When he turned around, he found Kiara staring at him intently. His surprise turned into tension upon seeing her so close again. Kiara told him to walk home together, and Okabe froze, a desperate protest rising inside him, unable to understand why she was doing that. Even so, Kiara, with a slightly hurt expression, revealed that she cared about his reaction, as if she were checking whether he would reject her. Okabe took a while to answer, watching her in silence. In the end, he said it wasn't that they couldn't, though he didn't know how to finish the sentence. As a result, Kiara seemed quietly pleased. Then, as the two of them began to walk, Rui observed them from afar without saying a word, her face shadowed, as if her silence weighed more than any spoken comment. Once they were on their way, Okabe, trying to sort out his thoughts, told Kiara that he wanted to know why she had sought him out. However, she replied that she simply wanted them to walk home together, as if that were explanation enough. Then she added that something had just occurred to her, and an instinctive fear lit up inside Okabe, because he felt he didn't understand at all what she was thinking. Kiara then looked at him with a smile, and with complete naturalness, she wanted to call him by a nickname based on his name. Okabe, caught between embarrassment and confusion, ended up accepting it, though his voice came out trembling. Kiara looked genuinely happy. She clasped her hands with tenderness and blushed, while Okabe avoided looking at her directly, completely overwhelmed. Shortly after, Kiara also asked for his contact information. In that instant, Okabe felt his mind spin out of control once again, trying to guess what she truly wanted. With that sensation still lingering, the day eventually carried him back home, where he tried to study again. Though he could hardly manage it, he received a gentle tap on the head, accompanied by a scolding. The one who reprimanded him was Inosakari, his cousin, a student at a prestigious university whom he admired. Moreover, she was his private tutor, someone who carried a calm elegance even while reading a book. Akari pointed out that his ability to concentrate wasn't sufficient, and Okabe, with weary honesty, admitted that many things had happened and his mind was a mess. Then Akari reminded him that it was only the first day of the new semester and suggested they stop for today. However, Okabe refused, insisting that he wanted to study a little longer. Faced with that stubbornness, Akari gently patted his head and agreed, asking him to do his best. Okabe responded with subdued obedience, as if he needed that routine not to lose himself. Deep down, Okabe reaffirmed what he had already decided before. He reminded himself that he must never again misinterpret things, because that was the only way to keep moving forward without falling into the same mistake once more. From there, his memory returned too vividly to certain scenes from the past, especially the image of a girl bursting into his house full of energy, arms wide open and overflowing enthusiasm, surrounded by affectionate gestures that left him defenseless. That girl was his older sister's friend, someone who visited them often to play, and who approached him with a confidence that seemed to have no limits. The moment she saw him, she would throw herself at him in a tight embrace, as if a single day without seeing him were an eternity. Meanwhile, he would freeze up, surprised by the impulse and by how difficult it was to react naturally to such direct contact. Back then, Okabe was still young and full of insecurities. For that reason, he told himself that behavior like that, seen from another angle, could be considered inappropriate. With his face completely red and his body trembling, he ended up convincing himself that he liked her in a special way. In that way, that interpretation grew strongly inside him, because her sweet words and constant affection pushed him to understand it all as something deeper than it truly was. However, with time, he understood that he had misinterpreted everything completely. That blow arrived in the winter of his third year of middle school, just as he was preparing for the entrance exams. That was when that person married another man, with a naturalness that to him felt unreal. Okabe saw her dressed as a bride, radiant, and felt his mind go blank, as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. From then on, even when he tried to study, the thought returned again and again. After all, he had taken for granted that they both felt the same, and because of that, he was unable to concentrate as before. In the end, that lack of focus dragged him to a result that still hurt to remember. He ended up failing the entrance exam for the high school he wanted to attend. At that moment, when Akari saw him, she had shown concern, saying that since he was so talented, his performance before the exam had simply collapsed, never imagining what the true reason was. Okabe understood that his cousin didn't know, and that his disappointment was a secret to everyone, one he preferred no one would ever discover. Thus, outwardly he laughed nervously, trying to appear calm. However, inside he saw himself with frustration, convinced that he only pretended to be serious, and that, in reality, he was someone far too aware of everything, someone who complicated things for himself. In the middle of that silence, Okabe softly called her name, and with a tension difficult to hide, he sought an answer from her by asking how she managed to overcome her worries. Then he explained that seeing her study with such discipline made him want to become like her as well. Finally, he asked her to tell him whether she had any secret for achieving it. Akari remained silent for a few seconds and then murmured that this secret was something she didn't intend to reveal. As she said it, she lifted a finger to her lips, as if sealing the confession. Afterwards, calmly, she raised her hand and added that sometimes worries were also very important. As a result, Okabe felt a resigned disappointment when he realized she hadn't told him what he most wanted to hear. At that moment, Okabe's phone rang. Akari remarked with curiosity that it was unusual for him to receive a message. Then Okabe looked at the screen and froze when he realized it was from Sano Kiara. Even worse, the content made him tremble, because she was telling him that they should get along well the next day too. Immediately, Okabe felt the same trembling as before, as if his mind were rushing toward a conclusion, and inside him appeared the thought that maybe, truly, she liked him. Akari watched him in silence, adding nothing, while the night fell over the building where they lived. For his part, Okabe repeated to himself with force that he wouldn't misinterpret things again, as if that promise were the only thing capable of holding him together. That same night, in different places, the thoughts of Hina, Rui, and Akari advanced in parallel. On one side, Hina, while getting ready to bathe and then sinking into the water with puffed cheeks and an irritated expression, remembered the look Okabe had shown at school. With that, she realized that he also showed that expression to people who weren't her. Deep down, she had held on to the idea that such closeness was special, and remembering that he had told her she was very pretty, she began to convince herself that, after all, it was natural for someone like him to be paired with a girl as attractive as she was. However, pride mixed with jealousy, and in her mind emerged the need to confirm herself as the most important one. Meanwhile, Rui carefully held a photograph or a card. Half of her face was covered by shadows that revealed nostalgia and a restrained anger. In that state, she remembered her childhood with Okabe, when they played outside together, and also remembered something he had once said about liking cold people. Thus, Rui repeated to herself that she had become a colder girl than any other, and that on top of that, she was his only childhood friend, as if that shared history had to mean something no one else could match. In the end, the mixture of surprise and anger in her eyes pushed her toward the very idea she didn't want to admit: she also needed to be number one. Meanwhile, in her own home, Akari was crying in silence, her cheeks red and her expression shaped by sadness, embarrassment, and an emotion she couldn't put in order. She remembered Okabe studying while she watched him, and at the same time, she heard again in her memory his words about liking intelligent and mature women. As if that compliment had opened a wound she couldn't close. She also remembered having taken care of him when he was a baby and told herself she had known him forever, believing at some point that she was the one who understood him best. From afar, as if that night connected their thoughts, the three of them pronounced his name in different ways. Without saying it out loud, the three reached the same point. They wondered why he supposedly didn't like them. In contrast, Kiara appeared as a silent and hard-to-read presence, with a mysterious smile that seemed to observe everything from a higher place, as if she understood the situation with a clarity the others didn't have. In the air floated an unsettling idea. Everyone seemed trapped in an exaggerated self-awareness that grew more severe with time. Therefore, that feeling cast a heavy shadow over what was to come. The next day, in the classroom, Okabe sat at his desk with Hina in the seat beside him, fully aware that she was the only one who spoke to him naturally. He listened to her chatting cheerfully while he looked the other way, uncomfortable yet attentive. In his mind, he described her as a cheerful, pretty, and very kind girl. With that image formed inside him, he ended up believing that Hina had fallen in love with him. However, although he tried to hold on to that idea as a certainty, a doubt slipped through, a doubt that made him tense. At the school entrance, Hina walked anxiously as she remembered having seen Kiara near Okabe, and she felt that scene had left her with an unpleasant impression. Even so, she repeated to herself that everything was fine, because that was what she wanted him to think. However, she couldn't help imagining that even if someone as attractive as she was stood by his side, if a girl as pretty as Kiara spoke to him from so close, Okabe might get excited simply due to lack of experience. With that mix of fake confidence and hidden nerves, Hina entered the classroom, greeted him with a smile, and wished him good morning. However, as soon as she looked up, she immediately noticed Kiara sitting next to him. Okabe responded nervously, and on top of that, Kiara smiled at him, which made Hina grow even more tense. Then Hina greeted Kiara stiffly, and inside, she felt that Kiara was already flirting this early in the morning. Right after, Hina commented seriously that it seemed they were getting along very well after only one day. In response, Okabe blushed, not knowing how to react. Meanwhile, Kiara, with a neutral expression, tried to understand whether they really were getting along. At the same time, Okabe felt that rather than getting along, it was as if she were simply observing him with an attentiveness that unsettled him. Suddenly, Kiara startled, as if worried about causing him trouble. Okabe told her no, although he simultaneously wondered why she was acting that way. Then Kiara looked away, blushed, searched for words, and finally hurried off. As she said goodbye awkwardly, she left behind a strange feeling. While watching her go, Hina clenched her hands in jealousy and told herself that Kiara was very pretty, and that if Okabe saw someone like her from such close proximity, he might end up falling in love. Even so, she smiled to hide it and commented that it was good he had made a friend. However, Okabe replied curtly, with a tone that sounded like reproach, as if she were acting like his mother. Then, seriously, he clarified that he went to high school to study and had no desire to make friends or anything like that. Hearing him, Hina understood that Okabe was giving everything he had every day. Even so, she couldn't ignore that Kiara had been getting closer to him since yesterday, and that contradiction bothered her more than she wanted to admit. In the midst of that tension, Okabe called Hina, covered his face red with embarrassment, and let slip the idea that had been haunting him. Maybe Kiara was in love with him. Hina froze when she realized he was thinking about Kiara, and although she remembered that just the day before he had told her that she was pretty, she began to feel insecure. Even so, Hina managed to respond with an appearance of calm. She told him that anyone would misunderstand if someone approached them that way. As a result, Okabe, unsettled, felt that her words confirmed his fear that he had misinterpreted things once again. Then Hina tried to balance the situation. She described Kiara as mysterious and reminded him that if there hadn't been a direct confession, maybe he was only imagining it. Okabe quickly convinced himself of that, as if he needed such an escape. Afterwards, he thanked her and said he was glad he had asked for her advice, because for things like that, she was the only one he could consult. That sentence struck Hina from the inside, echoing warmly in her mind. Her surprise transformed into a deep happiness that lit up her eyes. She smiled with confidence, brought a hand to her mouth as she laughed, and told him he could ask her for advice about anything he needed. Then Hina leaned closer, speaking in a flirtatious tone, and assured him that she would listen to whatever he wanted to tell her, even if it was about the girl he liked. As she leaned toward his ear, she repeated that idea with an intimacy that left him completely frozen. Okabe tried to deny it immediately, insisting he didn't have anyone like that. Meanwhile, Hina amused herself with his reaction, as if she didn't believe him. Later, together with her group of friends, Hina observed from afar and reached a conclusion that reassured her. Everything pointed to Okabe not liking Sano. With that thought, she felt proud, believing she had spent more time with him. However, that sense of ease was shaken when she overheard a nearby conversation. Someone commented that Kiara and Okabe were talking and that it was unusual. As a result, Hina felt a stab of jealousy as she wondered how it was possible that Okabe could now talk to Kiara without any trouble. Another girl mentioned that Hina also got along well with Okabe, and Hina replied lightly that she simply sat next to him. Then the others added that they were always seen talking cheerfully together and that she could speak in a fun way with anyone. That was when someone said it was almost certain that Okabe was in love with Hina. Hina froze for an instant and denied it out loud with a smile that came far too quickly. However, inside, she reaffirmed the idea that, just as she suspected, he was in love with her. She also convinced herself that, one way or another, she was special, and that it was obvious to everyone else too. On her way home, Hina was surprised to find Okabe further down the path and called out to him with familiarity. However, she stopped in her tracks upon seeing him next to a beautiful girl, whose expression was soft and serious. Surprise mixed instantly with discomfort as Hina couldn't help but acknowledge how attractive that girl was. At the same time, Rui asked Okabe who she was, and he, lowering his gaze, explained that Hina was his classmate. Then he introduced Rui. He said she was a year younger, his childhood friend, and someone who lived in his neighborhood, words that, to Hina, sounded like a painful reminder of a closeness she couldn't easily compete with. Then Rui asked whether Okabe got along with everyone in class, and with a concern almost maternal, she stepped closer to him to say she worried that ever since kindergarten, he had been almost always alone with her. Hina stayed silent, watching the closeness between them as if a warm space surrounded them both and left her outside. Even so, with a fake smile to hide it, she commented that they got along very well and hurriedly said goodbye, because seeing him like that with another girl affected her more than she was willing to admit. On her way home, Hina walked alone, carrying a melancholy mixed with repressed jealousy. She kept her eyes down and her lips pressed together, trying not to break inside. In her mind appeared the thought that there was another girl Okabe got along with, besides Sano, and the worst part was that she was his childhood friend. She thought that she, in contrast, had only been with him for a year, and that they had barely spoken a few times, so she repeated to herself, over and over, that she was only his classmate. As her frustration grew, she clenched her fists, and inside her burst the protest. She had believed he didn't get along well with girls. She had believed she was the only one. Even so, she forced herself to keep walking with strained determination, and told herself that Okabe could do whatever he wanted, insisting to herself that it wasn't as if she liked him. Then, in the distance, Okabe called out to her by her last name. Hina stopped and turned slightly, trying to sound indifferent, though the sadness was clearly visible on her face. Okabe approached her shyly, apologized for appearing so suddenly, and then suggested having a study session on Sunday. He explained that he had planned to tell her the next day, but since he had run into her at that moment, it seemed like a good opportunity. Hina remained silent, processing what she had just heard, while Okabe patiently waited for her answer. In the end, she accepted with a smile. She also admitted that he had caught her off guard and asked if studying like that wouldn't be a bother. Okabe immediately replied that it wouldn't, and added that on the contrary, he would like her to come. Those words hit Hina with such force that they left her trembling inside. A sweet, shining certainty formed in her mind, the idea that, just as she thought, he truly liked her, because he was being direct, and he even seemed motivated. Now more relaxed, Hina responded enthusiastically, and then commented that it was very typical of him to ask for a study session instead of something else. Okabe, meanwhile, grew internally agitated at imagining what that remark implied. Even while keeping a calm tone, Hina told him not to be shy and said she looked forward to it. Meanwhile, several girls were watching Rui from afar with obvious admiration. They excitedly said they were her fans and kept repeating how amazing she looked that day. They watched her walk with an elegant posture and a cool gaze that made her stand out even more. Thus, in whispers, they mentioned rumors about her, that perhaps she was a model, that she had been the star of the volleyball club in middle school, and that her presence was naturally imposing. Rui remained serious, but she was listening. Inside, however, she reaffirmed with calm confidence that yes, that was how she was. She was amazing. That certainty led her, unintentionally, to a childhood memory, one of those simple moments with Okabe that had stayed with her. In her memory, she asked him if it was good to be amazing, and little Aki, with a wide smile, answered yes, because he liked amazing things. Surprised by the clarity of those words, Rui connected the ideas impulsively. If he liked amazing things, then he liked her as well. From that day on, she kept that conclusion as if it were a shining truth. Now, remembering it, she saw herself smiling with a soft emotion, convinced that Aki had liked her since then. Meanwhile, in that same memory, he walked beside her yawning, completely unaware of the meaning she had given his words. Back in the present, Rui saw Okabe and greeted him kindly. She called him Aki naturally, and the girls around her were stunned to notice the closeness with which she addressed him. Rui smiled brightly, wished him good morning, and Okabe responded in the same way, unaware of the silent commotion forming around them. The others wondered who he was, how they knew each other, and why Rui spoke to him that way. Then she explained calmly, saying that he was her childhood friend. Upon hearing this, the girls reacted with excitement, as if everything suddenly fit into a special story. Okabe, on the other hand, simply watched, still surprised. Rui repeated to herself internally that for now, they were only friends, as if that word were a step she could hold onto with patience. Okabe looked at her and thought she was still as impressive as ever. Rui, surrounded by compliments and girls clinging to her arm, noticed the attention she was receiving. Even so, a firm idea appeared in her mind. Okabe had no reason to worry about her popularity, because between the two of them existed a special bond as childhood friends. A bond she felt was unlike anything else. However, without realizing it, a blush escaped her as she imagined that they were destined to end up together, as if that possibility were too natural not to believe in it. That feeling shattered when a girl greeted Okabe casually, and he responded politely. Rui watched from behind with a heavy seriousness, and a shadow of jealousy appeared on her face when she saw that girl near him, especially when she understood that it was Kiara. The conversations around them continued, and some mentioned that they had run into each other before on their way home. Nevertheless, Rui could no longer take her eyes off Okabe and Kiara. A persistent question arose inside her: who was that girl to Aki? Moreover, she immediately realized she wasn't the only one in that situation, because the day before she had also seen another girl with him. Then she remembered the scene on the way home, when she had seen Hina with Okabe, and although at the time she had been told that she was just a classmate, now, reconstructing it, she understood something different. In her mind, Hina's face appeared with a soft smile, and Rui reached the conclusion that it was the expression of someone in love. While other girls called out to her, Rui didn't respond. She was trapped in the need to confirm what was happening, repeating to herself that she had to make sure. With that determination, she approached Okabe, and in a sudden movement, slammed her hand against the wall beside him, making him flinch. Rui tried to remind herself that she needed to act calmly. However, her body moved before her reason could catch up. She cornered him and demanded to know who the girl she had just seen was. Okabe was left confused, unable to understand why Rui was acting that way. She leaned in even closer, pressing him with an intensity that demanded an immediate answer. In her eyes, possessiveness and fear blended together, because what she needed to hear was simple: that the girl was not his girlfriend, and that she was still number one in his world. Nervous, Okabe explained that the girl was his classmate. Rui repeated those words in distrust, as if she didn't want to accept them so easily. Then, he reaffirmed that she was. However, inside, Rui wondered if it was really true. While Okabe felt that she was far too close. Suddenly, Rui stepped back, as if realizing in an instant what she had done. She froze, red, trembling, her breath unsteady. At the same time, a chain of chaotic thoughts overwhelmed her. She felt she had gone too far, that she had shown desperation, and that she looked like a coward in front of him, with no idea how to fix it. It was then that Okabe, trying to break the silence, commented that what she had done was cool. Rui stood still in shock, and he, still nervous, explained his thought more clearly. Most people couldn't push someone against a wall with such confidence, and she could do it thanks to her presence. That's why, in his opinion, it was cool. Rui didn't know what to say. Instead, she felt her heart pounding, clinging to the word cool as if it were a sign. Her eyes filled with bright tears as she convinced herself that if he thought she was cool, then he still liked her. That idea held her up inside with an almost euphoric energy. As a result, she straightened herself as if nothing had happened and reminded herself that it was just like before, that he still liked her. With a calmness she struggled to rebuild, Rui commented that Okabe seemed to fit well into his class now, and that he was closer to his classmates. Okabe remained silent. Noticing that distance, Rui gathered a mix of thoughts. She realized there were more girls around him, and although she repeated to herself that it was normal at their age, she couldn't help the small weight of insecurity. To protect herself, Rui adopted a proud pose. She declared herself the coolest, assured herself there was no problem, and reminded herself that Okabe liked cool girls. Then, as if wanting to regain control of the situation, she apologized for interrupting him and said she would leave. However, Okabe stopped her by calling out to her and then invited her to a study session at his house. Rui froze for a moment, as if those words had ignited something far too intense. Inside, the idea of Akari's house felt almost unreal to her. Then she smiled with a dreamy air and accepted happily, remembering that they hadn't spent time together like that since elementary school. Okabe, serious, reminded her that it was for studying. Even so, Rui barely registered it, because inside she was already promising herself that even if he got closer to other girls, she, his childhood friend, would still remain number one. Later that day, Kiara looked at Okabe with a complex expression and mentioned that he had invited Rui to the study session. Okabe confirmed it and added that he had done what she told him to do. He had also invited Nishina, Hina, and the others. That detail seemed to brighten Kiara's expression. Even so, Okabe made it clear that it hadn't been easy for him to invite those girls to his house, even if it was only a study session. Because of that, he wondered why Kiara hadn't done it herself. Kiara remained silent for a moment, then looked at him with a mix of tenderness and shyness. She then told him it was because it was him, using his nickname with a closeness that left him frozen. After that, she added that if she did it, it wouldn't make sense. As a result, Okabe was left in shock, not fully understanding what she meant by that. Even so, another, simpler certainty appeared inside him. For some reason, when Kiara asked him to do something, he couldn't refuse. Later, Okabe walked down the school hallway thinking that he had forgotten to tell the others that the idea to invite everyone had been Kiara's. Although that omission seemed minor to him, he ended up convincing himself that everything would be fine. As that thought settled, the scene showed Kiara, Rui, and Hina separately, each with a gentle expression, as if the day were still calm. However, at that very moment, none of them imagined that a chaos capable of changing everything was approaching.